Number 10. No calling, no gifts. This is a time in history when men were told to be gentlemen and women told to be ladies. Naturally, that came with some weird social practices. For instance, women were discouraged from accepting gifts from men. Personally, I like to give my girlfriend flowers and chocolate. I'm a classic guy, what can I say? Can't go wrong with that. However, even if a handsome silver-tongued devil such as myself were to give some flowers and the finest dark chocolate a 7-Eleven has to offer, and a most promising woman were to accept said gifts, she may not be able to call me back. Literally because, well, the phone isn't exactly a thing yet, and also because that's something else women were just discouraged from doing. Call on a man? No way, Jose, even if he is super nice and waiting for a genuine response. One etiquette guidebook from 1882 called any woman who calls on a man ill-bred and positively improper to do so. I like when people give me flowers and chocolate. Maybe call me sometimes, I'm a little lonely. Number 9. Act like a lady. How dare ladies do anything unladylike? Ugh, said every man ever in the Victorian era. This is a time in history when ladies gotta be ladylike. That means makeup, corsets, and don't you dare do anything masculine. Oh, that's me angry. This is still a time when food isn't the greatest either, so imagine if you got an upset tummy at the dinner table. Happens to me a lot. You've got a handsome prince that your parents have arranged for you to marry. When you go to greet him, you do it with a simple gesture, as kneeling to curtsy could turn your linens a certain shade of embarrassment that 1800 stain cleaning technology could never wash away. You'd poop yourself. Where's Billy Mays when you need him, right? How dare women do such things as go number 2, or even worse, break wind? Oh, the nerve! That's just the way it went, folks. I don't make the rules. Number 8. Charged with love. Naturally, this was the past, and not being open to homosexuality was just the way it was. Especially when tucking yourself into bed at night alone wasn't allowed either. Homosexuality just wasn't gonna happen. They just weren't gonna be approved of it. It's just how it goes. It sucks. However, it's almost as if there's been love on this earth since day one, and to stop that kind of love, it's just silly, man. Wherever I go, everyone is welcome on this channel, or my Twitch. Chetty loves everyone, because in reality, this is a time period where you could wind up in jail for that kind of love. And as Austin Powers would say, that's just not very groovy, baby, yeah. Strangely enough, homosexual relationships between women might have been completely overlooked, as they were sometimes mistaken for women being friends. Yeah, I know. Some women even lived together, but given that they probably needed each other for financial support, people just kind of thought that's how it went, and they ignored it. It's like they live together, and like you start putting the pieces together, and it's like, you know, I don't know, something weird going on there. But love everybody, come on, be nice. Number 7, a good thing. If I'm talking about medieval times, there's a good chance I'm gonna bring up the super not cool, not fun, do not condone or support the behavior of marrying a woman at the age of 12. Yucky. In part 1, I mentioned that there was a ton of corners and streets being worked by the only other job besides street cleaners at 3 a.m. by women. However, after venereal disease was becoming a serious issue, it was getting pretty bad. It was becoming clear that a lot of people who were getting sick were young women, like 11 to 16 age group. Ooh. Which I shouldn't have to tell you is bad. That's pretty bad, dude. When I was 16, I was rocking Black Ops 2, hanging out with my buddies, and partying hard in the summer. I got a lot of good stories, maybe I'll share them one day. Catching all that nasty stuff is no way to spend your youth, so thank God the government changed the age of consent to 16 years old, which I know is not a solution for everything that was going on, but it was a small step forward in the right direction. That's what we like, good history, moving forward. We like that, Chetty likes. Number 6, the seamstress. Being that the Industrial Revolution had started and business was booming, people needed to travel for business, or more specifically, men needed to travel for business, which means they gotta be away from their wives, and that means they are away from the very thing we're talking about today, bedroom stuff. How did men solve this issue? Well, there was no shortage of ladies roaming street corners to aid in that matter. However, there's an option with a little less syphilis. There were aids or early blow-up dolls called travel ladies. Strangely enough, it was stored in a gentleman's hat. What? That's so wrong. Once it was ready to be used, it was inflated and reassembled. This is a quote from an ad from one of the products. It is inflated to the essential part of the woman wanted by a man. That just doesn't sound very good. This is why we have boards of people to check stuff from products before it gets shipped out to the public. I feel like that just wouldn't fly very well today. Number 5. Big polluter. This just doesn't make any sense. It never did to me, and it still doesn't. But in case you didn't know, self-pleasure was a big no-no, commonly called self-pollution, which honestly is very funny to me. That's just hilarious. Don't self-pollute yourself, Chris. That's bad. Don't do that. That's naughty. It was a sin and thought to be a cause for many ailments. I'm sure you've heard the classic saying that for guys, if you decided to go bump in the night by yourself, there's a good chance you'd need a walking stick because it would make you go blind. Women were also targeted, however, as for any pearl polishing by women was thought to be hysteric and needed to be treated for such. Look, the truth is, any man who wants to wax his carrot or woman tuning a one-dial radio should be able to do so without judgment of society or medical remedies of snake oil doctors. Love yourself, love everybody else, and just as long as the bedroom door's closed, you're good. Just don't do it in public, you're good. Number 4, shake and bake. I'm something of a scientist myself, but that doesn't mean I know everything, and if you actually need to learn something about health and safety, take it from a professional, not a second-rate John Candy. However, when coming across this fact, I just had to share it, because with my medical knowledge, this just doesn't sound right. Alright, so kids, we know how they're made. I don't need to go into detail for that. However, there was this idea back in the Victorian days that if a woman danced shortly after doing what mommy and daddies do, then there was a chance that her pregnancy just wouldn't happen. Or perhaps more commonly after riding a horse. Same idea. Okay. Which is frankly horse. I mean, come on. My mom always told me when she was baking that I had to be quiet and stop running around the house or the cake she was baking wouldn't rise. Well, they always did. I love chocolate cake. I mean, really, I do. I'm starting to wonder if there's a connection here. I was a rowdy kid. Number 3, the Kensington system. Poor Queen Victoria. I know this is kind of a stretch, but it relates back to the whole mistreating women thing. But basically, it was something implemented in order to control the young royal, make her dependent on her mother, whom she was not allowed to be without. Basically, modern day strict parents. Now, all the kids watching right now, or all the kids who've grown up, how well did that parenting work? Let us know in the comments. I'm willing to bet it created a little bit of a divide between parent and child. Am I right? That's exactly what happened with Queen Victoria. Shouldn't be surprised, really. Being a parent is tough. I get that, but squeeze too hard and the sand falls through the cracks of your hand. Victoria wasn't even allowed an hour to herself, and I don't care who you are, no matter how charismatic or bubbly. Everybody needs some alone time. Number 2, a healthy breakfast. Okay, not Victorian London, but this is just too funny not to mention, and it's around the same time period, very close. As the great minds of the time thought, self-pollution was a big no-no, and the reason for these urges was often related to food. Some thought eating meat would make you down bad, so a man named John Harvey Kellogg, you might have heard of him, aimed to cure the sickness of self-love. What if a man had a delicious, nutritious meal to eat, especially at the start of his day? Cornflakes by Kellogg's, the very same cereal that's probably sitting on top of your fridge, yeah, was partially originally designed to stop you from feeling those carnal urges. Now, not sure if that works. I mean, go ahead and tell me how you feel after eating a bowl of that. I had one this morning. I feel fine. I don't feel any different at all. I mean, I'm just, well, not really feeling the same about Pam Anderson anymore though. Number 1, rising action. This could get some married couples into some trouble if they're watching, so sorry. It's gonna be hard to talk about this without saying it because YouTube will send a stern letter if I do, but here it goes. The deed was not considered done unless both parties had signed off on it, had their toes curled, reaching the peak, your magnum opus, the way I feel when I eat at McDonald's, DEFCON 1, or simply mispronouncing organisms in health class. I feel like once you're involved, and to me, that's a done deal. You can't really reverse it from that point on, regardless of any of my euphemisms, but that's what they thought. They thought if you both didn't climb that mountain together, it didn't happen. 'Cause science. That's gonna wrap it up for me today, guys. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe here at Bumblebee, and if you too want an organism, then check out my socials linked down below. I've been your host, Big Ched, and stay sweet, my little honeybees. I thought about this beforehand. Or maybe I'm thinking about it right now. I don't know. You'll never find out. You can't think my thoughts. unless you can think my thoughts.
At number 10, watching consummation. Back in medieval times, depending on the century, weddings either meant a lot or meant nothing at all. If it was the early medieval age, then no one really gave a hoot about marriage, and I'll get to that later. But later, in the medieval age, marriage became a holy sacrament, and this sacrament had to be consummated. On the night of the couple's wedding, they would do the good old brown chicken, brown cow, boom boom pow, OMG wow, which could have been a positive or negative experience depending on circumstance, but it was also a little weird because there would be people watching it all happen. That's right guys, after the ceremony and reception, people would follow the bride and groom up to the bedroom and be like, hey Joe, grab the popcorn, we're watching the live showing of 50 Shades of Grey. And Joe would be like, yo bet, and then that's exactly how it happened. Anyways, this was all done so that there were witnesses to the consummation so that the marriage's validity could be backed up. So if anyone tried to deny that their marriage was legit, Joe with the popcorn would be able to back up the bride and groom and confirm that everything happened. Kinda kinky, kinda weird.
Number 9, dowries. Today's weddings are so insanely expensive. I don't know if it's ever gonna happen for me, for that reason alone. But, you know, they kind of replaced the dowry altogether. But what was a dowry? It was a set of assets, money, material, goods, real estate that would be given to the groom once the couple united. The purpose of the dowry was to entice a groom to marry the bride if he wasn't already attracted to her. A kind of, we will pay you to marry our daughter kind of vibes. But it also acts as a kind of insurance for the bride. Should the marriage end in divorce, the husband is expected to pay it back. So yes, there were indeed take-backsies if things got really bad. Though considering divorce and annulments were rare and the money really never belonged to her, not the best rule to live by, but the groom would also pay something called the bride price or bride wealth. The groom was expected to pay a sum either in assets or money to secure a lady's hand in marriage. This implied security for the bride and their family. But yes, in both accounts, technically, a bride could be bought and sold for whatever price the family/groom deemed appropriate, so really just a marriage pawn.
On number 8, shotgun wedding. Marriage and weddings back in the medieval ages were practiced very differently compared to today. Back then, people started getting married and having kids very, very young. Usually, girls would be married off as soon as they hit puberty, so around the age of 12, and they would start popping out as many spawn as possible because the high infant mortality rate made it very difficult to grow a family. On top of the duty to further the population, these marriages weren't for love. Arranged marriages were the norm back then because it was mostly used to join families for status or alliances, or because your dad owed Billy from down the block a favor and he offered you to his son Billy Jr. Marriage ceremonies were also very different back then. Because marriage wasn't as big of a fuss as it is now, it didn't matter where you got married or how soon. You could get engaged in the morning and be married by lunchtime if you really wanted to. Most people didn't need permission to get married, so they could hold the ceremony anywhere. Marriage ceremonies could be held in places like pubs, in the middle of the street, or even in bed. Because of this, it made it really hard to know who was married and to whom until the 12th century when it was declared a holy sacrament that must be observed by God.
Number 7, no objections. So obviously, with a lot of people marrying willy-nilly, a lot of marriages mostly made people miserable. Maybe. Enemies to lovers is my favorite book trope, so who knows how spicy things actually got. I hate you, I love you, next day, I don't know. But the famous line, speak now or forever hold your peace, only got introduced in 1215 to try and flesh out drama before they couldn't go back. In the Middle Ages, drama, discovered after marriage vows were exchanged, caused major problems since divorce wasn't easy or, you know, accepted. We will get to that later. For instance, Joan of Kent, who was known for marrying Edward the Black Prince and mothering Richard II, had a secret marriage when she was 12 years old. She didn't get approved. In her early teens, she was married to an aristocrat, but the secret marriage was discovered after 8 years. The papal court had to overturn it and return her to her knight. He died 11 years later, and it was after that that her cousin Edward married her. Wouldn't it have been nice to know that little detail before she married the aristocrat guy? Yeah, probably would have saved a lot of heartbreak. Hence why the speak now or forever hold your peace was introduced.
At number 6, shoes! Back in the days of old, shoes were apparently a huge staple in society. They were pointy and weird and expensive and complicated and were even integrated into marriage practices. During the wedding ceremony, it was a tradition for the father of the bride to take one of the bride's shoes and give it to the groom. The groom would then tap the bride on the head with the shoe in a token of his authority. But the shoe traditions don't stop at bopping people on the head like little bunny foo-foo. You know how these days there's a tradition of throwing the bouquet at weddings, and apparently whoever catches matches it is the next to get married. Well, that tradition sort of came from the medieval tradition of throwing shoes at weddings. Instead of throwing flowers, brides would throw shoes at their bridesmaids to determine who was next to walk down the aisle. Now, this whole bride throwing things idea has failed me before because I caught a bouquet once and I'm as single as ever, so maybe someone needs to chuck a shoe at me or something this time. Please.
Number 5, the bedroom trial. So divorce, again, wasn't a thing. On the upside of dying early, it potentially meant that you weren't locked in a marriage for too long. If the marriage did end, it wasn't a divorce, it was an annulment, which was very expensive. A common reason this happened was due to consanguinity, which was close relations by blood or marriage, which was forbidden. Other grounds would be adultery, leprosy, and impotency. Also failure to concede to the marriage debt, which was the obligation for both spouses to engage sexually. It actually didn't matter where this happened, you had to do it even if it was in a church. It was a big deal. Enter the bedroom trial. Court cases from the 14th century show records that bedroom trials took place that would determine whether a marriage should continue. The bedroom part is exactly as it sounds. The man and the woman were placed in a bed together and were to be watched by the wise women for several nights. If over the course of the night the man's member remains of no use, i.e. impotence, then it was determined that the marriage should end. But the wise women were most likely either complete strangers or the groom's grandmother. So I doubt that would have helped with the getting it up part. Poor guys.
At number 4, marrying the country. If you married an entire country, does that count as polygamy? Are you technically married to everyone in the country or just the one country as a singular unit? These are the shower thoughts that I wish I could ask medieval queens, but unfortunately they died a long time ago, along with their marriage secrets and probably some recipes for poison too. Back to this whole marrying the country idea though. Back in the medieval age, when someone became queen, they had to get married more than once. For them, it wasn't just about marrying their spouse, they also had to marry their country. This process was called consecration, and it was something that a ruler had to go through in order to be a legitimate queen. The queen would go through a symbolic marriage to the realm, complete with prayers and a blessing and a ring and a crown. It was essentially like a real wedding, except the groom was a nation of people. Sounds like a happy marriage to me. Yeah.
Number 3, the veil. As we have determined so far in our list, love wasn't the primary reason for marriage, especially for nobles, so as a result there were quite a significant amount of arranged marriages. Besides the symbolism of humility and purity, it was also used as a way of disguising the bride entirely. The bride would often be wrapped from head to toe to protect her from evil spirits. This tradition goes all the way back to ancient Roman times. That's one explanation, but during arranged marriages it was more literally used to hide the face of the bride from the groom. So if he didn't like what he saw after he literally unwrapped the package, well, too bad, she's yours now. Eventually veils progressed to being much smaller, but the tradition of revealing the bride to the husband to declare ownership remained a tradition even to this day, kind of, except now it's more romantically idealized. You see Priyanka Chopra's awesome veil in that, you know the one.
At number 2, long distance marriage. You know how during the pandemic people started having Zoom weddings? Well, in a way, people have been doing something similar since the medieval ages. Back then, a lot of weddings were simply for political reasons, and so a big ceremony was rarely needed. So when two people from different kingdoms were getting married, they didn't necessarily need to be there for the wedding. Instead, they could send proxies and have someone marry their new spouse on their behalf. This would be the legal binding of marriage, you know, the paperwork side of things. But once both parties could finally meet in person, then they would hold a second ceremony with all the pomp and circumstance that you would expect. And yes, it still included the whole watching the consummation thing. Ew. This proxy marriage actually happened to Marie Antoinette, and her brother was her proxy until she could get to the formal ceremony. So now we know that even back then, you didn't have to show up on time to your own wedding, and you could just get someone else to do it. Sounds a little cold to me, but like I've said before, love is dead and it died a long time ago. Mic drop, thank you.
Number 1, last but not least, and this is the most messed up, the Lord's Right. This one is definitely the most messed up tradition, and I don't even know how it was justified in the first place. Like, why was it even in place? Someone clearly made this happen so they could piss people off. The last thing anyone wants at their wedding is someone interfering with the wedding night. As we know, people for the most part had to observe the ceremony, but the Lord's Right was something even more horrific. The droit de seigneur was a feudal right that existed in medieval Europe that gave the lord of the land the right to sleep with the bride on the first night of the marriage. That's right, so most often they would take the bride's virginity. Now, just how often this right was carried through is debated, but if your lord had a particular vendetta against you, it It wouldn't be surprising. This right could also extend to a lord taking the virginity of every woman in the village, even if they didn't want to get married. It was ridiculous. However, late Middle Age and Renaissance era texts don't clearly determine whether this practice ever occurred. Texts from 15th century Switzerland references the Lord of Mar demanding the right of the first night or a hefty fee. So either you pay for it or I do it. The droit de seigneur was depicted in Mel Gibson's Braveheart, which added to the infamy of the idea, but no physical evidence determines whether any lord actually did it, but it did technically exist. Gross.
At number 10, veil. Through this video, you will come to find out that a lot of the wedding traditions that we practice these days have some pretty messed up origins. We'll get through a lot of them throughout this list, but let's start off by talking about the bride's veil. These days, a lot of brides choose to wear a veil on their wedding day. With so many different styles to choose from, this accessory is known to add that extra little pizzazz, little spice to the look. But throughout history, veils were used for different things, some of them being a tad bit messed up. Just a smidge. The rather obvious reason for brides to wear a veil back in the day had to do with religion and staying modest. But this hasn't been the only reason for veils. In ancient Rome, brides wore veils because it was believed to be effective at warding off evil spirits. The most messed up reason for the veil though, at least in my opinion anyway, has to do with the wedding transaction, so to speak. Since back in the olden days, marrying your daughter off was seen as more of a transaction, brides would wear veils to cover their faces and they wouldn't be lifted until after they were proclaimed husband and wife, so that the groom wouldn't be able to back out if he didn't like how his bride looked. Seems pretty messed up to me, but what are your thoughts on it? Tell us down in the comments.
Number 9. When doves cry. I've been to one wedding where they released doves, like actual real life doves, and I was like, do they actually do this? I couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't know it was a real thing. Why do we do this? Well, because doves mate for life, and they build a nest, and then they Netflix and chill until the end of their dove days. Sounds like perfect symbolism if I've ever heard it. Back in ancient Roman and Greek times, doves were often used as gifts from the bride to the groom. Pretty shitty gift if you ask me. Here's a bird that we now have to both take care of. The snow white ring-necked dove is used by magicians. They can't fly too well, they don't have a homing instinct, whereas rock doves, the ones commonly used in weddings that we see fly away over Nana's head, they have a homing instinct for hundreds of miles, so they're perfect for the gig. But they couldn't be released during foul weather, and they needed 2 hours before the sun sets in order for them to fly home. The wedding band has less rules than the doves. That's amazing. Their rider is much smaller. If you were to catch one of these doves at a wedding, you were also allowed to keep it back in the day. Also, great hands. I don't know who's catching birds or why they want to keep it and put it in their pocket, but you do you.
At number 8, best man. These days, the role of the best man normally goes to the guy who's closest to the groom, whether that's a brother or a best friend. But back during the time where women were married off like property, the role of the best man was very different and was all about protecting one's assets. Back then, bride napping was actually very common, so if there was someone else who wanted to marry someone who was already promised to another person, they might try and steal her away for themselves. Yeah, why? I don't know. This is where the best man came in. The best man's job was to protect the bride, and if she was stolen, the best man would be the one to enter whatever battle or duel was necessary to get the bride back. The best man was literally there to be the best fighter. The best man was also there to watch over the bride to make sure that she didn't try and make a run for it herself. They really said, try to derail this wedding and see what happens.
Number 7, a June wedding. As we're counting down this list slowly but surely, you've probably begun fantasizing maybe about your own wedding one day. Maybe it's a beach wedding, maybe it's themed like a winter wonderland. Doesn't that sound cozy? It's your big day, get creative. They say the best month to get married is June, and from a Canadian point of view, I can absolutely agree with that. In ancient Roman times, however, getting married in June was a must, not just a thing you wanted to do. See, June was the month of the god Juno. They protect women in life when it comes to marriage and childbirth, so if it's between that and like, I don't know, Halloween, obviously we're gonna go with June, better omens for sure. Another myth is that bathing was rarely done back then, so when majority of the population did finally, wash up at the end of May or beginning of June, that's often when it would happen, everybody smelled nice, they felt good, and they wanted to celebrate. So it was perfect timing. Better get me while my pits smell good, you know? That's a myth, but I can also see it checking out. A June wedding in ancient Roman days was also done so that after a spring birth, the mother can quickly hop back into action and help with that summer's harvest. Maternity leave who? Never heard of her.
At number 6, hashtag twinning. You know how at weddings the bridesmaids are usually wearing matching outfits? Well, this tradition dates back centuries, though it has changed slightly over the years. Remember how I mentioned that people would sometimes try to kidnap the bride on her wedding day? Well, other than the best man and the groomsmen trying to play their part in protecting the bride from being taken, the bridesmaids also played a part in that too. The bridesmaids used to dress identically to the bride so that it would make it harder to spot her and therefore prevent anyone from kidnapping her. This practice dates all the way back to ancient Rome and feudal China and didn't really start to fade out of tradition until around the 1880s. These days you get a couple of gifts from the bride for being in her posse, but back then you didn't get anything and you had to risk your safety for your girl Becky, who doesn't even want to marry Jeff down the block. I don't know.
Number 5, a toast. My favorite part of a wedding has to be the speeches or the toasts. They're always way too long or too personal, or you know what, just too depressing, just way too sad, just tears. You're like, why are we talking about this? It's a nerve-wracking part, even as a guest, just to get up randomly and be like, okay, look at me everyone, hi. No, I don't want to do that. Back in the 1800s though, only men were allowed to give these toasts. The oldest friend, the groom, the best man, and then the father of the bride. The whole thing would have been done in 8 minutes. Guys suck at speeches. They're just like, a lot of ums, that's all I'm saying. Wedding toasts go back as far as the 6th century BC. When Greeks were getting married, the father of the bride would drink the first glass of wine just to make sure it wasn't poisoned or anything. Romans would also drop a piece of burnt toast into the wine in order to make the wine taste less bitter, hence the term toast. Yeah, now we get it. Yeah, wine was so bad back then, they had to use burnt toast Crystal Light just to get through the day. Yuck.
At number 4, transaction. I find it to be just a little bit messed up how before now marriage was mostly about money or status and not about love. For a long time people didn't get to choose who they got to marry, and there was almost always some kind of monetary transaction involved in the wedding. This whole idea here is a reason for the traditional act of the bride's father walking her down the aisle and giving her away, so to speak. In the past, fathers of the bride and groom would come together to establish an agreement, like X amount of money for someone's daughter or whatever. Once that was set up, the wedding became a big deal to see if the transaction would actually go through, and many precautions were put in place to make sure that no one backed out. One of those precautions was the act of the father walking his daughter down the aisle. This was done so that they stayed close to one another in the off chance that the groom or his family decided to back out. That really took the romance and sparkle out of weddings now.
Number 3, wedding cake. As the youngest of 3, I can confirm that we get away with the most. The youngest often do. The middle child is just plain ignored, and then the oldest, well, they usually have the most responsibility in the family. Usually when a bride and groom cut the cake on their big day, it's for them. They save a piece till their anniversary, they put it in their partner's face, it's fun, whatever they want to do. Often in history, the eldest child would get the first slice. How lucky is that? When it came down to cutting the actual cake too, well, that meant that the bride is no longer a virgin. It's an awkward few bites. Wedding cakes today are delicious and they're pretty much an art form. TV shows are devoted to them, like Cake Boss and other cake shows that I can't think of. If you're lucky, you might find a few cake charms on the inside as well back in the day. Real, non-edible cake charms. You wanted to find these in your cake, they brought good omens to the table. To find a rocking chair meant that you're going to live a long life. An anchor means you're bound for adventure, sailors ahoy. And a purse meant that you would have good fortune. Let's just hope you didn't find the charms with your teeth, or else you would be using said new fortune fixing your chiclets. Very metal, very real. Not good.
At number 2, plague flowers. In a lot of weddings, the flowers are very important. There's the flowers for the centerpieces, the bouquets for the bride and bridesmaids, there's flowers everywhere. Get your Benadryl. But why is that? Well, the idea of carrying a bouquet at a wedding dates back to ancient Greece, where it was believed that carrying a bouquet was thought to ward off evil spirits, but a little later on down the line, the presence of bouquets at weddings got a little bit darker and a little more precautionary. During the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, when the Black Death was running rampant throughout Europe, people were trying anything and everything to try and ward off the plague. Back then, people believed that smells carried contagion, so people would would fill their pockets with fragrant things to keep the plague at bay. This was later integrated into wedding practices, and brides started carrying around a bouquet of stinky stuff like garlic and dill to protect them from catching anything. Over the years, these stinky stuff was replaced with nice smelling flowers, but really, no one cares what's in the bouquet anymore, because all people want to do is participate in the wedding Hunger Games and fight to the death to catch the bouquet at the end of the night. Why? Why are we hurting each other for this? Why?
And finally, number 1, wedding rings. One ring to rule them all. Perhaps the most important piece of the wedding puzzle, rings. Whenever somebody is about to pop the question, everybody around them always needs to see the ring. Congrats, let me see the ring. Oh my god, is it this? Is it this? Egyptian pharaohs first used rings to represent this eternal life. The circle has no beginning or ending. They created this concept that we adore to this day. The center of the ring was also believed to be the gateway to the unknown. Your finger just disappears, you're like, what the f? These Egyptian Ouroboros rings were the first, a snake eating its own tail, #love. When Greeks came in the picture, they took this tradition, started using copper and iron rings in ceremonies, and the iron rings had a key symbol on them, meaning that the wife now has control of the house. If you like it, then you should have put a key on it. Come medieval times, the ring gets another upgrade. Now we have these precious gems to be added to them, a little bit more glam. Rubies symbolized passion, sapphires symbolized the heavens, and diamonds to show strength, because they were rock hard, and obviously you know the rest. Come the 12th century, the Christian church declared marriage as a holy sacrament, so rings were solely used now for that ceremony. That's when the engagement ring came into place. There needed to be another trade or promise that was just as strong as a wedding band. So now there's rings for pretty much everything.
Number 10, it's just a cold sore. The Victorian era is cool. The art, the fashion, and technology of the time, I think, are always fun to take a look at, especially since steampunk has its roots in the Victorian era, and who doesn't like steampunk? Come on, there's just a lot of cool steampunk stuff. And honestly, we haven't seen a lot of that in a long time. We need more. We need more. Something not so cool from that era, however, was what you could catch from another person should you decide to take up a bed with another person. Syphilis, yep, one heck of a disease. Funny enough, it was so common that it was making intimacy itself an unusual practice. People were scared, and honestly, maybe rightfully so. There's no cure, and if it progresses to its later stages back then, well, you'd go crazy. And then you'd end up being that guy that's always screaming in the streets. Every city has one. You know what I'm talking about. Number 9, the French letter. The issues of intimacy and its repercussions were becoming quite clear in the Victorian era. Something had to be done, as spending any amount of time in the brothels could have you shucking barnacles off your lower deck in the morning, if you know what I mean. Introducing the revolutionary new invention, prophylactics. For those that are college age, you might find it disturbing that these party favors weren't made of rubber or disposable. Yeah, hear me out. They were made of sheep's guts, and they had to be soaked first so they would become flexible. Because when you put these bad boys on, they had to be fastened on. It's not very good, not very attractive. Once the deed had been signed off on, the device was then washed and then hung up to dry like your dirty laundry. Once it was dry, it was placed in a small box for the next time. Because seeing your wife's ankles might make you feel a certain kind of way, and now you just have it ready to go. And number 8, the products of our sins. Having fun when the lights can be turned off is great. Who doesn't enjoy a little toe curling? Yeah? Except sometimes there's this crazy thing that can happen, where after 9 months, another human spawns in. Insane, right? I know. Well, back in the Victorian era, this phenomenon was happening, but only for married couples. As you have to be married, of course, or else a child would be born out of wedlock, which to people at the time was just the worst. Oh, I never. These stigmas were not favorable for women, as some preferred to avoid that kind of press by abandoning or straight up just unaliving their children. Horrible, just horrible times. Just another one of those good old wholesome times in history where we were treating women with the utmost respect and decency. Very nice. We were actually not very nice. Number 7, diet. Bedroom misconduct was becoming a huge issue. Refer to number 9 and 10. While women did get most of the blame because, well, you know, history, men did get some of the blame. The issue of intimacy for men could be described as barbaric primal sense. So how do we curb this? How do we stop men from acting on these caveman urges, ooga booga? Well, simple really. Men just have to stop eating certain foods, as it was thought at the time that food had a link to the misconduct, or rather, the overabundance of bedroom-related issues, including mustard, pepper, rich gravy, beer, wine, cider, and tobacco. And if you weren't paying attention, that's basically the diet of every man in Victorian times. Not sure how a jar of finely prepped mustard would get you flustered, but okay, sure. The beer makes sense though, have a few beers, and even the mop leaning over in the corner looks pretty lonely, and boy, that mop has lovely hair. Number 6, job market. Ladies of the evening, women of the night. Women who make beds go bump in the night. They were everywhere in Victorian London, a lot. It's partially related to some of the points I previously mentioned. Now, I'm not here to say it's necessarily a bad thing. Personally, I don't think it is. As they say, it's the oldest profession in the book, with an estimated 80,000 women working in the night by the late 1890s. You'd have to be crazy to miss that. I mean, they were literally everywhere. With numbers like that, there's something for everyone and in varying price ranges, as they can be found in brothels or townhomes set up by the wealthy men for their mistresses, pretty much anywhere trouble likes to spawn. Even some artists took advantage of this by living with the gorgeous girls of the evening, as going behind closed doors with one was debatable, but becoming friends? Now that's a social transgression. Becoming friend, how dare you befriend the people of the night? Number 5, Jolly Lad. When people think about certain magazines that depict lewd imagery, you probably only think of Playboy. The bunny imagery was good marketing, honestly, just smart. But what if I told you the Hefmeister wasn't the first to publish such a magazine, or imagery? Back in the Victorian era, there was some saucy imagery being produced. The government had outlawed such indecency, but this only made the lewd picture industry move underground, where naturally it flourished, especially in major cities. And if you knew where to go and how to ask for one, you could purchase something from the hidden menu. Kind of like when you go to McDonald's. Yeah, there's a hidden menu there too. Google it and see for yourself. I'd repeat what my favorite one is, but I would be in trouble from the YouTube gods. And I've been treading on thin ice this whole video, so Number 4, the first counterculture. The 1960s were a very important time for many different people. Black Americans were fighting for their rights, music went from holding hands to strawberry fields, if you know what I'm saying, and everything that your parents told you just kind of felt wrong. If you grew up then, you know what I mean. I know people like to make fun of hippies, but there was some good ideas there. Well, in 1890s England, they were sort of having the same thing happen. Obviously not as strong as a push as it was in the 60s, but still. Basically, after all the oppression towards bedroom relations, people began to open up. Not literally, just open up thinking wise. That's really gross, don't repeat that. There's only one way we all got here. Unless you're a test tube baby, of course. In that case, thank you for watching CT133576-2. To some historians, this makes sense. When you push for things to happen or ban, eventually people will push back, especially if it's something like bedroom time. Everybody likes a little bit of bedroom time. Valentine's Day wasn't too long ago. Remember that? It was good. It was fun. It was good fun. Number 3, Jack the Ripper. While the man's numbers don't compare to any of the other horrible people in history, he's unusual because of his brutality and the fact that he was never caught. Jack the Ripper was maybe the first modern serial unaliver. He haunted the streets of Victorian London and is responsible for claiming multiple women's lives, women of the evening to be exact, and they began to know the name Jack the Ripper. Now, we'll probably just have to show you pictures of Victorian London or maybe some B-roll of a shadowy figure because there ain't no way we can show the crime scenes. There's probably a dozen different theories on who done it. Some say it was multiple men using his name as an alias, some say it was Prince Albert, there's even some who suggest that he was a she, and which explains why women were so easy to go off with Jack. That actually kind of makes sense to me at least, and why no one really would be looking for a woman back then. Kind of makes sense. Anyway, be careful out there, ladies. Just be careful. Number 2, Queen Victoria. It seems old Blighty herself may have been a tad more promiscuous than you'd think a royal to be. Well, not with other men, but her husband, who in her diary claims to be the love of her life, which honestly is kind of sweet and romantic. That's nice. One thing that I find interesting, however, is that while lewd images were outlawed, the Queen may have commissioned a painting of herself that was quite risque for the time, to gift to her husband, of course. Hypocrisy much? I say lewd, but it was probably just in her loose-fitting clothes, with maybe like an ankle showing or something. Still, unusual behavior for the Queen. I'll remember that for next time, Blight. I'll remember that. Number 1, Prince Albert. If you've ever stepped foot into a tattoo parlor, then you might know where I'm going with this. Prince Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria, had some controversy circulating his name. One, because he shares a name with another Prince Albert who was speculated to be Jack the Ripper, but also because of a very unique piercing. Go ahead and take a guess where that piercing is. Yeah, I didn't think so. As a man, if your anatomy could be described by an internet comedian using moderately funny euphemisms, then the piercing would go through your German army helmet. That makes sense, right? The horror. The absolute horror. It's rumored that he had one of these piercings. Did he? I'm not sure. But if it means anything to you, Nicholas II had a tattoo, so it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. Number 10, Boy Jones. What's more intimate than a stalker? Am I right, ladies? If there's one thing women have loved throughout history, it's having every second of their privacy being watched by some creepy man, right? No. I can only imagine it's been worse since the dawn of smartphones and social media. That must be horrible. Well, as it turns out, there were some real creepwads in the Victorian era too. The Boy Jones was a stalker of Queen Victoria who on multiple occasions snuck his way into Buckingham Palace, one time escaping with a pair of the Queen's underwear. What? Arrested multiple times but still somehow found his way back to the palace. But what they should have done was swap the Queen's underwear for a pair of mine after a shift in the garden center I used to work at. Oh yeah, nobody's coming for you after sniffing those bad boys. Oh! Number 9, graceful words. This was a time when ladies were supposed to be ladies, and that means manners are on the table and elbows are off. Dresses were worn to not show ankles, God forbid an ankle or wrist bust out. I think more importantly, however, or rather unusual that is that women were expected to talk a certain way. Good evening, Mr. Burrows. You must excuse my tardiness. There was a dreadful man screaming at me because my ankles were shown whilst mounting my carriage. Your what was showing, love? Oh, you hurdle it. I can't believe it. Excuse me. I must be someone else. I don't need to tell you guys how ridiculous that is. I say fly off the handle, ladies. Wear what you want, do what you want. Number 8, shots. Not the kind I like. Well, I don't know about you guys, but nothing ruins the mood for me and my lady like being fired upon. Yikes. I'd like to stay the night, kid, but the automatic gunfire coming from outside is starting to get to me. See? All gangster impressions aside, things must have been that way for poor Queen Victoria as she was shot in her carriage in 1840. A young man fired 2 shots at her carriage. More attacks would actually follow in the coming years. It's kind of hard to feel that certain kind of way after bullets go grazing past your pretty face. The worst thing that ever happened to my generation was making sure nobody was home when you were studying with your boyfriend. I was too busy playing Call of Duty, but at least I never got actually shot at. You know what I mean? That's just a good thing. Number 7, expectations. Alright, this one goes out to all the married ladies in the audience. Hello, how are you? I'm doing great, thanks for asking. I'm curious as to why you got married and what your expectations were. Did you marry your high school sweetheart and live happily ever after? Maybe you had a shotgun wedding and after one night at the saloon. Maybe you just really wanted to find a nice man and settle down, start a family, be a mother. I think any of those options are great, so as long as you have options. In Victorian England, you were expected to do the latter. Women were expected to get married and have kids, and that's about it really. My question is, why were ankles and wrists an issue but giving birth isn't? What I mean is it's kind of a compromising position to be in. All I'm asking is that the girls get treated fairly and given choices and be allowed to show some ankle. It doesn't make any sense. You can look at her business down there, but you can't show an ankle? That doesn't make any sense. I'm a magician. Number 6, double standard. Divorce sucks. It's no fun. The person you once loved and cherished is now the villain in your story. I love McDonald's and I don't ever want them to be the villain in my story. I love you guys. Gotta get those Happy Meals. Divorce is something that isn't new. Honestly, it was probably invented the second after marriage was. In Victorian times, men had the right to divorce their wife if they had committed adultery. Women could not. Well, if you refer to my last part, you know that men were doing more than a little window shopping when it came to women. When men left town for business, they would have hired the services of a woman who patrol the streets at night. No, I'm not talking about Batwoman either. So men can divorce women if they dare to do what they did on a regular basis. Yeah, that's totally fair. That's good. Equal. Absolutely. Yeah. Number 5, emo girl. All the forever alone people, raise your hand. Let me hear you roar XD. I like to joke around a lot and say I'm a lawyer, a firefighter, and the cutest guy on the whole wide internet. But if there's one thing I know, it's people. I like people. I love them. I spend a lot of time with them, and after hearing this, I've come to the conclusion that this is where the emo girls come from. I figured it all out. It's down to a science. I'm a scientist now. Do you ever get that feeling in your tummy on Valentine's Day because you know it's going to be another one alone? And you'll be forced to be on your own, and that means sad music and crying in your room. Same, it's Drake's Marvin room for me. Well, single women in Victorian times had similar issues. Since women were expected to marry and have kids, single women who were also forever alone were pitied by society, which I argue is just way worse. No one wants to be pitied. Ugh. Number 4, gold diggers. She take my money when I'm in need. She driving. Okay, anyway, back to the actual content. Well, not exactly. While today in a place like sunny California, you might see an older man with a woman who's half his age. Maybe he's driving a nice car, or she's got on the very best and latest from Louis Vuitton. Stylish, yeah. Most of us think some thoughts about what we might think is going on there. We can kind of be judgmental sometimes when we see things like that. However, looking through a lens of 2022 to Victorian times might make the women of Victorian times appear to be gold diggers, but in reality, it was because all of their financials were tied to their husbands, legally too. Which, if you can imagine, that system didn't work too well. What if your husband is broke? What if your husband is running amok with sultry lasses on the street corners? Like I said before, no divorce, but even if she could leave him easily, supporting herself afterwards was going to be an issue, especially financially. Number 3, birth factory. Just pump them out. The faster the better. Quantity over quality. Just get them out. The use of birth control, as you can tell, was not a common practice. Anyone who's over the age of 25, ask your grandparents how many brothers and sisters they have. I'm willing to bet it's in the 6 to 8 range. Let me know in the comments below, I'm curious. A trend that would continue for a few decades after. Education is important, and I'll get to that in my next part. Women were simply expected to act this way. Maybe it was the sign of the times since the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Maybe the factories needed workers, I don't know. Which, in case you didn't know, they used children as employees. Maybe not so nice. Unfortunately, that was when there was an issue, and there were many. They had no HR to go to, and that was the least of their worries, really. Number 2, no school for you. No higher education for women. Banned from going to university. I don't think so, not very nice, no. Honestly, any society that doesn't want half of their population to go to school probably has a few things to work out. It's a boys' club, and they can only go to university so that they can learn to be smarter and be businessmen, so they can earn money and thus have the facilities to court a woman who really doesn't have a choice anyway. Women had jobs, not careers. And they were all the jobs that you can think of. The ones that were too feminine for men, as women were too feeble to participate in a men's job, which is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I'm happy to say that in 2022, we showed them wrong. Chetty loves everyone. Just remember that, I love everybody. You go, girls. Number 1, strict rules. Okay, so after a night in the bed sheets with the gal that you love, or maybe the one that you found, there's a good chance that 9 months later, a smaller version of you two could be walking around. A byproduct of intimacy, if you will. This was always something I wanted to rant about, but I always found it strange how strict parents and teachers from this time were with their kids. You gotta brush your hair, bed made, and whatever you do, don't ask for more gruel. Please, sir, could I have some more? Whatever that Charles Dickens book was, I think it was Oliver Twist. They made us read those books as kids, and I don't know why, because they're kind of boring. From the extreme military code ethics happening at home to the long days in a factory at work, being a kid was tough, man. Earning the punk rock blues of today. I'm just a kid and my life is a nightmare.
Number 10, rice as detergent. As it was always said once before, rice is life, and during the Qin and Han dynasties, people formed the habit to wash their hair every 3 days and to bathe every 5. For this reason, the government then declared to take off 1 day off in every 5, and what they used was rice, or rice water if you don't eat rice. When you wash your rice, you are left with rice water, which is what you typically pour out of, and rewash your rice. And you do this until your rice is clear, but in some cases like in ancient China, they would use the murky rice water as detergent. And it wasn't dirty, by the way, it was just the starch coming off of the rice. In the pre-Qin days, people first washed their hair and bathed with rice water, which, as I mentioned, contains starch, proteins, and vitamins. Not only did it help remove oil stains and maintain the scalp and hair, but it also helped with rough skin. There was also medicinal functions associated with rice water, as it helped with cold hands and feet, low back pain, and frostbite, as well as fatigue and relief. Such natural cosmetics were in effect a combination of shampoo, shower gel, and facial cleansers. Then there was the Chinese honey locust with its many uses. During the Southern Qi dynasty, it could effectively clean the skin and eliminate dirt, as well as being a kind of ancient moisturizer. For For laundry, it could stop clothes from fading and deforming, and for bathing, it could help treat rheumatism and ringworm. Even in some parts in modern China today, still uses rice as a hair wash, and my god, their hair is so long and shiny. I need that, for sure. Number 9. Salt and vinegar toothpaste. When it comes to hygienics, your teeth should definitely be included. In some places like ancient Rome, they used urine to brush their teeth. Some parts of the Victorian era used salt, and for ancient China, it was salt, but hold the P. It was vinegar instead. Just like Little Miss Vicky's chips, the ancient Chinese civilization, or at least part of the Wei and Jin, Su, and Tang, would dip their fingers in salt, tea, wine, vinegar, basically the latter, to wipe their teeth and rinse their mouth. Written by a famous ancient Chinese doctor, Essential Recipes for Emergent Use Worth 1,000 Gold, mentioned getting up every morning and putting salt on your mouth, hold it for a bit, and rinse with warm water. As it was noted, to make your teeth firm, later the ancient Chinese no longer used salt to clean their teeth because they had by then discovered an exclusive recipe, tooth powder. Number 8. Horsehair. A very common thing in ancient times is to figure out what is the most basic way to self-care, and when you figure out you gotta use salt and vinegar as a toothpaste mix, normally one would use their fingers as an application. But in ancient China, they figured to migrate from using their hands to using willow branches at first. The method is to first take a small swath of willow branches and rinse it clean, then one end is chewed until the branch fibers are exposed and the end becomes hairy. In this way, a simple toothbrush is achieved, and after that the toothbrush was dipped in a little of that magic tooth powder. Brushing teeth complete, very simple, and in low in cost. Later toothbrush was upgraded, with the wise Chinese using animal bristles to make toothbrushes that were very similar to those of today, most of which employing pig bristles. Although the texture was a bit hard, it was cheap. But for the rich, they would use horse bristles because they were apparently softer and more comfortable for brushing the teeth. Even the Southern Song dynasty, there was a shop dedicated and specializing in production and sale of toothbrushes. They became more common and were made of wood and bamboo, very similar to today's upgraded invention, and they would have 2 rows of holes where they punch a horse bristle and have it attached. Number 7. Threading. When it comes to shaving or plucking one's hair, you'd have to take the conventional means of using a razor, a tweezer, or sometimes wax. Ancient Chinese, however, didn't have a culture where it was typical to custom to shave one's hair unless it was facial hair. The concept of threading is very popularized around this time and is actually still very common practice today. You can find a specific threading store in your area too. The practice is to remove delicate facial hair to make the face look smoother, as both women and men would use this treatment typically to look good before a wedding. Basically, you'd first start the application with lime powder to the face, then a wet cotton thread is then twisted up, down, left, and right around the hairs to be removed. Hence, threading. They'd use this method using their teeth and their hands. As I mentioned, it's still used today by many different cultures as well, and it's a still popular method used by elderly people in China today. Number 6. Toilet papier. The invention of the toilet has been used as a way to ensure human waste was distributed away from the rest of the town so that the sustainability of health and wellness of everyone else was separate. But the concept of toilet paper was made in ancient China after people were getting sick of using leaves and branches and even rocks. After the Han Dynasty, there was a special tool called chugi, made by cutting bamboo slices into stripes. The shape was thin, flat, and slightly wide around its edges. The better models had greater water absorption and a light fragrance. The upper classes would also wash themselves afterwards with water and then even use aromatherapy. It took a very long time for the chugi to give away its paper due to the latter's of high costs. It was not until the Yuan Dynasty, and then the only emperor generally used straw paper. And the Ming Qi Dynasty, straw paper was often used by common people, with royalty opting instead for silk. Number 5. Smallpox snack. This is gonna be a little nasty for some, but before I get into it, when it comes to medication, especially in an era where protections against viruses, disease, or infections were scarce and uncommon, in ancient China they had written down guides on one of history's first vaccinations. Even before it was written down, people have heard usages of vaccines and figured they could do it themselves. So when parents heard of feeding scabs of smallpox patients to their young as a form of smallpox vaccine, they figured it might work the same way. Like chickenpox, they thought maybe exposing yourself to smallpox could keep you healthy and help boost your natural immune system to deflect the illness. But of course, this made the situation more worse for them, as this form of treatment wasn't any better. Instead, doctors would actually crush the scabs into a powder and then blow them up people's noses. I mean, it did work for a bit, but it was 2% chance getting smallpox scabs inhaled into your nostrils would infect and affect you mortally. However, it was a better chance statistically in defending yourself against the smallpox spread head on. So naturally, people all over would sign up for this effective cure. Of course, we don't do that now, but hey, c'est la vie, whatever it takes. Number 4. I could hair less. When you're living in Imperial China, you could pretty much bet off the chance you might be getting micromanaged. So much to the point it might irritate you and shave your head. Unless that was the requirement, then keep your hair the way it is. But unfortunately, that was the requirement in this era. When the Manchus conquered the Ming Dynasty and established their own Qing Dynasty, the new emperors forced the Chinese to wear their hair in a style called queue. The queue was basically a shaved forehead and a long braid down the back, and the men would be forced to wear their hair in. Cutting it could result a one-way trip to the gallows, as it was illegal to remove the key or for men to wear their hair in a different hairstyle. Chopping off the key was a sign of rebellion against the government, and the reason why the death toll in the Taiping Rebellion was so high was because Qing forces could easily spot the rebels, as they were the only ones not wearing a queue. Number 3, you're in for a treat. Of course, like all civilizations in the past, they need to utilize all of their resources as much as possible, especially the ones from our bodies. Previously, as I mentioned, how in Rome they would use urine as an honorary mouthwash to keep them teeth pearly whites, but in ancient China they would use urine as medicine. They invented basically endocrinology in the early 200 BC, which is, for those who are too lazy to Google, the study of hormones and endocrine glands and organs. Hormones secreting glands and certain organs in your body make up your endocrine system. When they were picking human secretions, the ancient Chinese choose pee. They would gather up to 150 gallons of male urine in a large pan and boil it until it evaporated. A crystallized hormone that they would then call an autumn mineral would be left behind, and it was just crystallized urine. They couldn't exactly inject hormones back in the day, so they would take the crystallized urine by eating it. They ate a lot of it. And for each dose, one medical paper instructed, take 5 to 7 pills with warm wine or soup before breakfast. And to be honest, it actually worked. Using it as a hormone was able to put a more in-depth understanding of medicine as a whole, and China would then develop a whole field of medicine 2,000 years before the rest of the world. Still no idea who thought of taking pee, boiling it, and placing whatever was left back into one's mouth, but we gotta start somewhere, I guess. Number 2, twinkle toes. I want to make a joke about that Nickelodeon guy, that one producer guy who had a specific taste for this topic, but that would have been a step out of place. Anyways, of the status of the women in ancient China, all of them would be encouraged to bind their feet as tightly as possible. The goal was to have your feet less than 4 inches long. This was called the lotus foot. Although the practice was originally started by the upper class court dancers in the 10th or 11th century, the practice eventually spread to the lowest of the classes until it was finally banned in 1911 after Western missionaries campaigned against it. And at its peak, almost every upper woman class and 50% of the lower class women bounded their feet to look this way. Nonetheless, in some rural villages across China, the last remaining women who have had their feet bound as women are still living, and some of them are still binding their feet, despite the ban. The strange thing was definitely a hot and spicy thing to look at for the men of ancient China, and it was definitely on the requirements if they wanted to wife you up. They even had a specific love manual on how to have fun with their wife's deformed foot. I mean, every part was attractive, but the feet? You could say it was a toe curling experience for both of them. Sorry. I'm horrible. Number 1, a eunuch's life for thee. Aside number 2, women weren't the only ones physically deforming themselves to survive the day-to-day life in ancient China. As I mentioned in the previous top 10 disturbing ancient China facts that will leave you speechless, eunuchs were typically found in the Forbidden City, or, as we know now, the Forbidden Palace. And there were roughly 70,000 of them by the time the palace was finally completed. We learned in that video that eunuchs were a volunteer position, and it was a way to work for the emperor as a servant. For a poor person, it was the best shot at a better life for yourself, at the expense of getting fixed, if you catch my drift. In fact, it was so common for one around the rich cities of the palace for a male to be eunuch, that poor families would even have their children castrated at birth, so essentially you'd be set for life to end up working for the emperor before you even thought of it, which to be honest, would suck if your parents did that, because what if you wanted to open your own business and sell shoes instead? I don't know. It's your problem now. Oh well, either way, being a eunuch was a decent and fairly popular career for a man to just chop it off. Self-castration peaked during the Ming Dynasty, and as one point it grew to an inevitable 100,000 eunuchs working across the country. So many people were committing to the cause that the government had to chase neutered jobless men away from the palace. Eventually they set up an application process where 200 copper coins could get you on a waiting list for eunuch career applications. 250 could work for the emperor, but that was out of 1,000 applicants, so many would end up jobless and wonder why they sniffed their doodle in the first place as they begged on the streets. Number 10, oral care. When it comes to overall healthcare, your teeth should also be in that list, and for the Victorians, typically they only really go to the dentist when the damage is near its breaking point. And because they didn't have any toothpaste that wasn't drenched in the multitude of poisons they thrived off on, people would brush their teeth using salt, typically putting salt on their fingers and then rubbing across their teeth. The toothbrush as we know today was invented in 1857, however, it wasn't until the nylon bristle toothbrushes of the 1930s came along that brushing one's teeth became more widespread. Salt is a natural disinfectant that helps with gum disease in a few ways. It removes loose debris and cleans the teeth and gums, but reduces inflammation and swelling and soothes the gums. It also gets rid of decay and plaque. Gum recessions can be caused by eating too much salt, and gums as part of the immune system may pull back to reveal a cementum of teeth, making them more vulnerable and less resistant to tooth decay. So while it may look effective, it's actually temporarily removing surface stains. As for salt, the same holds true. Salt acts as a surface abrasive and can definitely make the teeth look whiter, but it can definitely damage your tooth enamel, and unfortunately once your teeth is damaged, it's damaged for life. And it wasn't until the 1940s that the concept of brushing one's teeth would be considered a routine event. Number 9, bad bathrooms. The bathroom as we know it is a Victorian invention, but at first it could be a dangerous place. Besides horrible cases of scalding in the bathtub, there was even reports that there were incidents of lavatories spontaneously exploding. The reason this might be was due to the fact that flammable gases such as methane and hydrogen sulfide emanating from human waste built up in the sewers, and then early toilets would leak back into the homes where they would theoretically be ignited by a naked flame of a candle. Wild stuff, but that did happen. And since showers were not invented yet, everyone did bathe to keep clean. Most people bathed in rather small quantities of water in their bedrooms with a basin and pitcher of cold water. Poorer families would have to boil water on the stove and then add it to the cold water to a wooden or metal tub, usually in the kitchen area where it was time for a deep scrub down. Hands, face, and armpits and crotch were essentially regions that was not necessarily to be submerged in order to maintain cleanliness. Nicer homes not only had proper porcelain bathtubs, both hot and cold taps nearby, even some had the luxury of a luxurious foot bath, but these extravagant things were more for your feet. Number 8, flammable Parkinson. Although it's a great invention as it helped many advance many parts of our modern civilizations of immense proportions, it still aggressively fills out our landfills and destroys thousands of ecosystems. But still, it's a very useful material, but of course not everything about it at first was beneficial to its beholder. A British inventor named Alexander Parkes, who invented the moldable material and was considered the first celluloid of a bulk material for forming objects as we call today plastic. He christened it as Parkinson, but it quickly became known as its American name of celluloid. The development of celluloid was particularly spurred by the desire to reduce reliance on ivory with its shortage caused by overhunting, and the inventor Alexander was never able to see his invention reach to full fruition after his firm went bankrupt due to scale up costs. Such early plastics were highly desirable because they allowed everything from brooches to hair combs to billiard balls, previously only available in expensive ivory, to be made cheaply. It was even used to make collars and cuffs that could be easily cleaned. Unfortunately, Parkinson is also very flammable as it degrades and can self-ignite and is explosive on impact. Weird. Number 7, boracic acid in milk. No one should cry over spilt milk unless it's been treated by boracic acid, and in that case you should be 100% allowed to cry and your experiences are valid. In the 1800s, boracic acid was believed to purify milk, removing the sour taste and smell from milk that had gone off. In a casual remark in her widely popular 1861 book, Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management mentioned one should use boracic acid in their milk. She told consumers that this was quite harmless in an addition, but she was wrong. Boracic acid purifying milk was responsible for getting a lot of people sick. Small amounts of boracic acid could cause nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea, but worse, it was what boracic acid concealed that was particularly dangerous, and before pasteurization, milk was often contained a huge amount of bovine TB, or, beef TB, tuberculosis, which would flourish in the bacteria-friendly environment created by the substance. Bovine TB damages the internal organs and the bones of the spine, leading to a severe spinal deformities. It is estimated that up to 500,000 young people had died from bovine TB from the milk in the Victorian period, which is why you should check your sources and not get everything from one source, like your mom telling you this random article that she found on Facebook. Number 6, carbolic acid poisoning. Victorians linked cleanliness to godliness and respectability. The idea that it was next to godliness was very deeply ingrained. The new science of microbes only testified the Victorian preoccupation with tackling germs which they now knew could lurk out of sight. Chemical cleaning products to eradicate dirt and diseases were heavily advertised and highly effective, but their active toxic ingredients like carbolic acid were contained in bottles and packages that were indistinguishable from other household products. Boxes of caustic soda and baking powder could be easily mistaken. In September 1888, it was reported in an article that 13 people had been poisoned by carbolic acid in one incident, and 5 died. And only in 1902 did the Pharmacy Act made it illegal for bottles of dangerous chemicals to be similar in the shape of ordinary liquids. So it took a couple of years, but still, at least now we wouldn't have issues identifying bottles from the other. But as cleaning products go, arsenic and strychnine were commonly used in Victorian cleaning products, which if some don't know, the immediate symptoms of acute arsenic poisoning includes vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. Those are followed by numbness, tingling of the extremities, and muscle cramping and death. But the Victorian era was also about fitting into their corsets, and a few illnesses wasn't necessarily seen as a bad thing. But either way, the era in itself wasn't unfamiliar with tragedies, as death lurked at every corner from either poisonings or TB. Number 5, washing the hair. I have really long hair, and it does take a minute to maintain it, but thanks to modern technology and our hair product serums, I don't have to worry that much about my hair. But in the Victorian era, women's hair were considered the crowning glory, and the longer, the healthier it is, the better. It would only be let down when she was alone with her husband, and so stayed in pins for the rest of the time. To keep it healthy, women didn't have to wash their hair nearly as often as we do today, taking this particular habit only a weekly or monthly schedule. According to research on the hair care part of the period that this was in, hygiene and beauty towards the end of the Victorian area suggested that people with oily hair should only wash their hair every 2 weeks or so, and those with normal hair should wash it once a month. And since sources recommended washing the hair and scalp 1 or 2 times a week, the reason being is because soap would quickly dry off the scalp, leaving it very itchy and dry. And of course, this was an era where they didn't know much about chemicals and its horrible effects on the human body, and sometimes even use pure ammonia to clean the hair, which, as you know, ammonia is a product used for cleaning hard surfaces like your stove or your sink. So cleaning your scalp would be very bad. Still, I'm wondering, how did they use ammonia if their hair didn't fall out? Probably either way, shampoo is still something that we use now, as it was invented in 1927 as a liquid soap. Number 4, bread alternated with alum. When basic staples like bread started to be produced cheaply and in large quantities for the new city dwellers, Victorian manufacturers seized the opportunity to maximize profit by switching ingredients for cheaper substitutes that would add weight and bulk. Bread was adulterated with plaster of Paris, bean flour, chalk, and alum. Alum is an aluminum-based compound today used in detergent, but then it was used as bread back in the day because it was whiter and heavier. Not only did such adulteration lead to such problems as malnutrition, but alum produced bowel problems and constipation or chronic diarrhea, which was also often fatal for people. Number 3, beauty. Those unlucky to be born with freckles were advised to rinse their faces with lemon juice, or in more stubborn cases, rub the crap out of their skin with carbolic acid, or sit in the sun until the freckles burnt off. And if premature wrinkles resulted from these harsh so-called cures, young women might be having the habits of their older relatives and drape their faces with thin slices of raw beef before bed. Sleeping with any animal fat on the skin, like fat, veal, lard, all that stuff, was thought to restore youthful suppleness and beauty. Looking fit and healthy is a very common shared narrative that has been defined and redefined multiple times throughout history, and when it came to the Victorian era, weight loss drugs was often permitted, and if anything encouraged for both genders, but mainly ladies to maintain their figures in and out of corsets. Overweight women were instructed to drink their water with lemon, and if that didn't do the trick during the weight loss drugs, they would also use ingredients like arsenic and cocaine, believe it or not, tapeworm larvae. Skinny women didn't have an easy time either, as they were also told to lie still as often as possible in dim light to avoid all anxiety, endeavoring to feel indifferent to every sensation, as one book had recommended. Weird. Number 2, asbestos. Asbestos was the new wonder material of the Victorian era and was used in all manner of household objects as insulation for electrical appliances like toasters and hairdryers, mixed into plaster and applied to walls, and even some toys, which is actually still a problem that we're facing today. By the end of the 18th century, scientists have discovered many uses for asbestos, such as filters and for fire resistance. This paved the way for asbestos becoming a popular industrial materials by the mid-1800s. However, when commercial products of asbestos insulation began in 1879, the first case of an asbestos-related disease, described as curious bodies in the lungs, were detected in 1899. The first cases of asbestos and lung cancer attributed to asbestos exposure, which was diagnosed in the United States. Symptoms can vary into severity, but in common okay note, some types of asbestos are cleared naturally by the lungs or broken down already in the lungs, but long-term effects of the exposure doesn't show up until 10 to 40 years later. There is no cure for asbestos once it has developed, and because it's not possible to reverse the damage to the lungs, meaning those who were exposed to asbestos for a long time had the consequences the longer they were exposed to it. Number 1, arsenic. We all have our own favorite colors. Mine depends on my mood, but it's usually red or black. For the Victorians, it was notably obsessed with the color green, even to the point that shades of green was driving them nuts. For some reason, they placed in a nice shade of green wallpaper, and everyone at home was just getting sick, from the young to the old. When a doctor in the 1860s noticed a spike of hospital visits, all the patients seemed to share the same idea of green wallpaper wrapped around their walls. The culprit was found in the dye used in the production of the paper, a vibrant green pigment containing a highly toxic metalloid, arsenic. The killer, as it so often turns out, was inside the house, plastered on every wall and beautifully decorated sheets. Wallpaper was killing people, while arsenic was known most as a rat poison in homes. The substance found its way in every other aspect of the daily life of the Victorian person. It could be found in household items such as food coloring, dresses and baby strollers, to makeup. When mixed with paint, arsenic created an alluring pearlescent effect, most typically a brilliant shade of green, and so it became fashionable to wear laurels and flowers painted with the dye. Like poisonous lead before it, radioactive radium after, dousing yourself in arsenic was a deadly fashion trend of the day. Chemists and governments were very well aware of the dangers of the element, but demanded that such miners pulled it out of the earth in volume nonetheless. In summary, it was a renowned designer and social activist named William Morris noted the poisonous substance and the new health regulations associated with it and decided to change it to non-toxic wallpaper.